Frank Halstead was the first hermit of Lake Minnetonka. He settled on the south shore of what we now know as Halstead's Bay on August 14, 1855, and built a small 14 by 18 foot log cabin. He returned to his hometown in Elizabeth, New Jersey in 1861, and during that visit, the Civil War broke out, and he enlisted in the United States Navy and served with his brother George on the USS Minnesota. After the Civil War, Frank returned to Minnesota in 1866, and 2 years later, he built what became known as the Hermitage on the main lower lake opposite Crane Island. It was a simple building, 1.5 stories with a cellar basement. The basement was used as a bedroom, but the upstairs half-story was also a winter bedroom and also served as a storage room. And then the main level was used for a dining room. Frank Halstead didn't particularly care for the term hermit. At first he accepted it, but later grew to despise it. The Minneapolis Tribune in July 1876 described him. In his manners, he was ever quiet and unassuming, and though sympathetic and approachable, he invited no confidence and gave none. A recluse, he was hospitable and affable, and when asked why he chose to live such a secluded life, he always replied in such a manner as would show the interrogator that it was not a question he cared to answer. Captain Frank Halstead was one of the founders and driving forces between the Lake Minnetonka Improvement Company during the early and mid-1870s, particularly focusing on the dredging of the Hull's Narrows, the original narrows connecting the upper and lower lakes. In the winter of 1875-76, Captain Halstead started the construction of a steamboat Mary. This was a large propeller-driven steamboat on Lake Minnetonka. When it was launched in June of 1876, it proved to be very unseaworthy. It would list over to the side and did not operate very well. Despondent over this, and perhaps for other reasons unknown to us, he decided to set his affairs in order and take his own life. On June 23, 1876, he borrowed a neighbor's rowboat, rowed out around Crane Island, tied a bag of rocks weighing about 40 pounds around his neck, and cast himself into the lake. 2 weeks later, people realizing that their beloved hermit had not been around, they went searching for him, and when they knocked on his door, they found nobody home. They got back in their boats and started to row back towards Excelsior, trolling for fish as they went along. As they rounded Crane Island, they found a body in the lake, and unable to lift his body into the boat because of the decomposition that had happened, they returned to Excelsior, procured a coffin, and floated it underneath him and raised him up and brought him back to the Hermitage, where they buried him under the canopy of a large maple tree. When they searched the Hermitage, they found letters from Frank Halstead, and one was addressed on top of a trunk to his brother George Blight Halstead. The letters sent out his estate and named him executor of his will. And George came out from Elizabeth, New Jersey to settle the estate and found that he very much enjoyed Lake Minnetonka. And so George decided to stay. George set about first setting up the Mary to be an adequate steamboat, and where Frank thought that it was a terrible failure, George soon discovered that it was a matter of simply ballasting the boat correctly, and after that the Mary performed admirably on Lake Minnetonka. An article in the Minneapolis Tribune described Major Halstead. It says, Major Halstead is a man of polished and refined tastes and had a fine education. He was a graduate of Princeton College and belonged to many societies. He was genial and companionable and was well liked by those holding his acquaintance. Many picnic parties have had lunch on the Hermitage property, and in this manner the Major made thousands of friends. Major Halstead turned the Hermitage into a tourist attraction, and at first he was charging people 25 cents each to come ashore and visit the Hermitage. That was later raised to 50 cents. In addition, people could pay him an added fee where they could sign the siding on the Hermitage building. The more prominent signatures of famous people that were visiting the Hermitage and Lake Minnetonka were then covered with glass so that nobody else could write over the top of them. When tourists went inside the building, there were decorations all around. There were framed prints, engravings, photographs of his family. There was a grandfather clock, a dining room set with his mother's china, but there were also 2 Civil War swords, Major Halstead's sword and Captain Frank Halstead's sword. In addition, their great-grandfather's Revolutionary sword also hung in the house. The Hermitage remained a tourist attraction until September 6, 1901. On that date, the Hermitage took fire and Major George Blight Halstead died in the flames. In accordance with Major Halstead's will, he was buried to the left of his brother Frank Halstead underneath that same maple tree, and a large boulder was placed also to mark the grave. Inscriptions on the boulder were later engraved: Francis William Halstead, born Newark, New Jersey, 1833, U.S. Navy, 1861-65, died 1876. And George Blight Halstead, born Elizabethtown, New Jersey, March 17, 1820, United States Volunteers, 1861-1866, died September 6, 1901. Today, both the maple tree and the boulder are lost to time, but the major and the captain both still reside on their property in Minnetrista.